Hmm. If you don't mind, there's quite a lot of questions coming in. Can I put some of them to you?
Absolutely.
Interesting one. Charles says, what is the actual proof for the flight-fight syndrome, please? And how up to date is that? Which, of course, you address absolutely in the book.
Yeah, proof. I don't know. I certainly do address some more recent research on the fight or flight response, which is coming out of UCLA, where she started, there's a woman, what is her name? Taylor. And her research really shows that there's a third option around the tend to befriend response to a stressor. And then, of course, everything happening with polyvagal theory is a whole new understanding of how our bodies respond to stress. So I won't be claiming proof of any of this. I think that this is a construct for making sense of how we have different pathways to respond to stress, and it's being rethought and re-understood in really interesting ways all the time. And I try to touch upon those in the book.
And you also touched upon something which was something that I've done some work on as well, where you say a lot of these theories, particularly the flight or fight, a lot of the experiments were done on male rats. I mean, all toxicology is done on male rats. And then it's applied to women, of females of any species, as if, well, it worked on the male rat. So, you know.
The interesting paradox there is that when they, in the past, before it was mandated that there be gender parity in the clinical trials, the reason they didn't include women there are a number of different reasons, but a main one was because of the cyclical nature of female hormones. They thought it might muddy the data. And exactly, like it might behave differently at different points in the month. And that's probably something we should understand.
It might muddy the data we're getting about males, and we can't have that.
Right. So we have a big problem with that.
All right. Yeah. An anonymous attendee, if there are neurons in the gut and you have chronic autoimmune gut disease, would you say anxiety is false or true? Ooh, that's a good one.
Question. All right, we have another hour. So that question I addressed directly. I think this is of such central importance in modern life. Autoimmune diseases are at such epidemic proportion right now, and false and true, it's both. It is predominantly false-ish in the sense that when you have an autoimmune disease, you are by definition in a state of systemic inflammation. And those circulating inflammatory molecules called cytokines, they cross the blood-brain barrier. They're going to impact the threat detection centers in the brain and tell your brain exactly that. We are under threat. So it is very hard to feel well and calm when we're in a state of chronic inflammation. And I think that given the research we have around ACEs, which stands for adverse childhood experiences, and the fact that this can increase our proclivity to developing an autoimmune disease later in life, I think there is a true anxiety component to autoimmune disease, where there's I always have to be really ginger when I touch around this concept, but I think that just that idea of the body attacking itself is a very fundamentally unnerving state to be in. And I think it pertains to messaging we got early in childhood about our worthiness of love. And so, but there's an enormous false anxiety component to it. And that's where I would start to basically understand that autoimmune disease is not just a destiny. There's so much to be done, but you kind of have to get out of the hallowed halls of conventional medicine, allopathic medicine. It's necessary to work with a functional medicine practitioner or a naturopath who's going to see autoimmune disease as something that can be addressed at the root. It has to do with healing the gut lining, removing things that are inflammatory, removing sources of damage to our tissues, which the immune system circulates and sees as foreign and something to attack. And so there's a lot that can be done to achieve a lot of healing and well-being with autoimmune disease.
And we haven't even talked about antibiotics, and we haven't got time, sadly, but it's an important issue which you touch on in the book. All right, Jane Maskell, I was interested to hear we are hardwired to feel safe in company and community. How does that apply to those who are shy, antisocial, or autistic, and so on? Are those people going to miss out on this kind of supportive feeling?
Love that question. No, there's no right or wrong way to socialize. If somebody extroverted wants to be at a big party with a lot of people and that's how they get that need met, great for them. If somebody very introverted or shy or neurodivergent wants to hang out one-on-one once in a while, that might scratch that itch for you. And so you get to pick how you like to interact with people. I'm just here to say nothing is not what I recommend. So anything that's not nothing. I think that social connection is a non-negotiable for human happiness, but what it looks like, what feels good to you, all comers are welcome. So I know for me, I prefer one-on-one in small groups, and I need a lot of introversion recovery time after social interaction, and that's just fine.
Short question, but not an easy one, from Arnold Whitkin. Is the question always, what am I going to do about this anxiety?
Question always that, that's a deep philosophical question about the way I approach mental health. It doesn't have to be. I think that if I'm understanding correctly, I think it touches on something really profound, which is we keep doing this thing of, well, you're anxious. Well, obviously we have to play Mr. Fix-It and change that. That's not okay. We don't want you being anxious. And if that is overwhelming or feels invalidating on some level, and you just want to be allowed to exist the way you are, I could support that. There's nothing in my mental health philosophy that says you have to engage with this approach to feeling anxious. I think that I'm here for anybody who's like, I'm suffering and I don't want to be suffering anymore. And for those folks, I'm here to say, the conventional medical world might have told you this was a genetically determined chemical imbalance in destiny. And if you felt like you haven't yet been helped by that model, it feels kind of demoralizing and hopeless. And I'm here to say there's always hope. But if actually engaging and trying to fix anxiety has felt invalidating and stress producing, there's no need to keep engaging. And if you want to stay in that mode, it's okay. And I don't think there's a right or wrong here.
Alice Huang, I think that's how you pronounce her name. If that's not how you pronounce it, Alice, my apologies. Can anxiety cause somatic symptoms like tinglings, burning sensations, and pins and needles in various parts of the body?
Yes, and so this is the crux of the book, right? So yes, anxiety absolutely can, but what is anxiety? And sometimes what's happening here is that something else is causing this tingling, or what might be called paresthesias. There are things like vitamin B12 deficiency, which is especially common with anybody eating more of a vegetarian or vegan diet. Something like anemia can be contributing to this. A variety of micronutrient deficiencies, a variety of chronic low-grade infectious agents like chronic Lyme disease or Epstein-Barr virus. So there's a lot that can be contributing to that kind of sensation. And some of those things are simultaneously contributing to the paresthesias and the anxiety. And then sometimes the paresthesias themselves become a source of anxiety for us, and we spiral about the sensations. So I'm here to say I would look first at nutrition and to think about how to make sure your nerves are getting the nutrients they need to function properly.
Patricia Lightfoot says, when would you advocate medication for anxiety?
Yeah, sometimes. And that's really important here. We didn't even really do the whole treatment of psych meds in that conversation. So I'll do the quick primer on that. Basically, if somebody here is helped by psychiatric medication, I am not dogmatically opposed to that. I see that as a victory. Hallelujah. If you've found the path that helps relieve your suffering, this is great. I am in the business of relieving human suffering. If that's your path, that's fantastic. If you are someone who has felt like you've been chewed up and spit out by the mental health field as it currently exists, you've tried every med, you've switched, you've increased the dose, and you're still not finding relief, I know those people, and I know that that can feel really defeating, and you can start to feel hopeless. So I am here to loudly proclaim there's reason for hope. That is not the only strategy to finding a place of well-being. And so if you are somebody who, and I think overall the trouble is we just don't have the time for proper informed consent when somebody is being prescribed a medication. We need to understand the efficacy, the potential side effects, what it might be like to one day taper off the medication. This is all important to know up front before you take that first pill. But if medication is the right path for you and it kind of creates a bridge for you to walk out of a place of feeling stuck and really suffering, getting to a place where you can start to do some diet and lifestyle adjustments more easily, this is great. I think I don't do it so cavalierly because what I find most damning is that for some people, it's really hard to get off of medications. So it's just not my first line treatment. there's also a part of me that really likes an elegant solution. And when somebody comes to me with anxiety, I'm not thinking this is a Lexapro deficiency disorder. You might have a different word for Lexapro, but what would be called escitalopram in its generic form. But basically, I'm not thinking about this as a psych med deficiency disorder. I'm thinking, what's causing this anxiety? Is it inflammation? Is it something with the gut? Is it a micronutrient deficiency? Is it chronic sleep deprivation? Is it sleep apnea? And I want to identify the true root cause and address that. And often that obviates the need for medication. And so I just don't see meds as always the most elegant solution, but sometimes they're necessary. And I have no dogmatic stance against that.
And you also make quite a lot in the book. You talk about how difficult it is to get off things like diazepine, you know, that whole class of chemicals. You make the point that that's sometimes more difficult to get off than anything else. And you also make very valuable points about how when people try to tail off these things, generally the medical profession tells them off at an alarmingly precipitous rate. And you're very clear, if you're going to tail something off, do it really gradually.
Yeah. So that could be its own whole book. I call this chapter The Silent Epidemic, but for anybody trying to taper off of psych meds in general, but the benzodiazepine class of anti-anxiety meds in particular, it is, in what I witnessed, the hardest thing to get off of, including illicit substances. And I don't say that to discourage anybody who's in that process or trying to do that. There are ways to get off, but it just needs to be handled with so much care. And the trouble is that psychiatrists, general practitioners, we aren't trained to taper people off properly. And what's worse is that sometimes patients who have been turned away, doctors aren't supportive, doctors aren't knowledgeable how to do it. So then patients go, they do it themselves, they go off cold turkey, and then they become symptomatic. And the problem is the physician will then say, well, this was an indication that the medication was working, and now you're relapsing. So let's go right back on. And we need to be really careful. How you're feeling after getting off of a psych med is not a relapse. It is withdrawal. You might eventually be in a relapse, but we can't speak to that when you're still in a state of very acute psychopharmacologic withdrawal. And so to just recognize that's withdrawal, and it requires what's indicated as a different way of supporting what your physiology is going through in that moment.
We've just got time for one more question, and my apologies to there's dozens of people who've written questions. I'm sorry we can't get to them all. If we had another hour, we might be able to make a dent in the list. Stacy says, does it take a certain amount of emotional intelligence to identify anxiety the way you describe it? And if so, how can I help my teenager with her anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that we need to gatekeep I think anybody can access it in this way, supporting our children's mental health. I think that I don't want any parent to ever feel intimidated, like that they aren't capable of holding space for that. What really is being asked of us is attunement and validating open-ended statements. So, and to watch out for what triggers us. So sometimes what happens is our children's moods remind us of a dark place we've been in and we want to make it go away. Or we just are so uncomfortable with the idea of them suffering that we kind of arrive at some relationship that looks sort of like denial or trying to suppress. We want to be available for the full range of how they're feeling. They're having a human experience. It comes with suffering. It comes with anxiety. It comes with dips in their mood. And I think that we can really model for them how to name our feelings. And we can help them sometimes, teenagers, sometimes they don't want our help, but we can do our best to model it, help them name their feelings, and just show them that there can be a stance of curiosity about how to think about mood. And I think that we talk a lot about false moods in my household. My daughter is 6, and she can identify when she is in a blood sugar crash induced mood. And so that's the progress we've made thus far here. And I think that alone is so empowering, because if I had known that in college or med school, man, would things have been different. So any kind of modeling of how to identify our false mood states can be really empowering, and to just make a really safe space for people to talk about the true moods, and to make sure that we work on our own triggers on our own time so that we can really attune to what they're going through.
Ellen, thank you for talking to us. My apologies to all of the dozens and dozens of people who've written in. I'm sorry we just couldn't get to your questions.
My fault. Brevity is not my strong suit.
Tell the How To Academy to get Ellen back and we can carry on. Several people want to know the book. There it is. That's the one. Ellen, thanks so much for chatting to us. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you. And thank you for writing the book. I really enjoyed it.
David, thank you so much. And thank you, How To Academy. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for your excellent questions.
All right. Good night.
Good night.